I had always been fascinated by the abandoned house at the end of the street. It was rumored to be haunted, and I had always wanted to explore it. So one day, I decided to gather up the courage to go inside. As I approached the house, I noticed that the gate surrounding it was rusted and the windows were boarded up. The once beautiful mansion now looked like a scene straight out of a horror movie, but I was determined to find out what lay within. I pushed the gate open and stepped inside. The overgrown lawn was littered with broken bottles and discarded newspapers. The front door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, I was greeted by a musty smell. The inside was dark, and I could hear the sound of something scratching at the walls. I was filled with a sense of unease, but I continued on. As I made my way through the house, I noticed that everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. The furniture was overturned and there were holes in the walls. But the strangest thing was that there were no cobwebs or signs of any living creatures, like mice or insects. It was as if time had stopped inside the house. I finally made my way to the staircase, and as I began to ascend, I heard a faint whisper. I paused and listened, but the whisper had stopped. I shrugged it off and continued up the stairs, but as I reached to the top, I heard the whisper again. This time, it was louder and more distinct. I followed the whisper down a long, dark corridor, and as I approached the end of the hallway, I saw a figure standing in front of me. It was a woman dressed in a long, white gown, and her eyes were black and empty. She whispered my name, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to run, but I was frozen in place. The woman began to float towards me, and as she got closer, I could see that her skin was rotting, and her hair was matted and tangled. I was filled with terror, and I screamed, but no sound escaped my lips. Suddenly, the woman vanished, and I was left alone in the dark hallway. I stumbled back, and as I reached to the top of the stairs, I tripped and fell down the stairs and landed in a heap at the bottom. I tried to get up, but I was too scared to move. I lay there for what felt like hours, until finally I mustered up the courage to stand. I made my way back to the front door, and as I stepped outside, I felt a rush of relief. But as I walked down the street, I realized that the woman was following me, her ghostly figure appearing and disappearing behind me. I ran as fast as I could, but no matter how fast I ran, the woman was always right behind me. I eventually made it home, and I locked the door behind me, but I could still feel her presence. From that day on, I was haunted by the woman in the white gown. Everywhere I went, she was there, following me, whispering my name. I tried to tell people about what had happened, but no one believed me. And so, I lived the rest of my life in fear, always looking over my shoulder, always hearing that whisper, always feeling the presence of the ghostly woman in the white gown. The old abandoned asylum on the edge of town had always been a source of fear for the locals. The building had stood empty for decades, ever since the patients and staff disappeared without a trace. But one day, a group of teenagers decided to sneak into the asylum to see what was inside. They made their way through the dark corridors, their flashlights illuminating the peeling paint and cobwebs that covered everything. As they explored deeper into the building, they heard strange sounds coming from the walls, the rustling of papers and the scraping of metal against concrete. But when they looked closer, they couldn't find the source of the noise. The air grew colder as they made their way down to the basement. The stairs creaked beneath their feet, and the flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the walls. But when they reached the bottom, they found something that made their blood run cold. There was a room at the end of the corridor that was unlike any other in the building. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. And in the center of the room, there was a figure that seemed to be made of shadows. The figure didn't move or speak, but the teenagers knew it was watching them. They tried to run, but the doors wouldn't budge. The figure slowly began to move toward them, its form growing larger and more terrifying with each passing second. The teenagers screamed as the figure engulfed them in darkness. When the authorities finally found their bodies, they were twisted and contorted into unnatural positions, with looks of terror frozen on their faces. To this day, the haunted asylum remains empty, and no one dares to venture inside. But sometimes, on a quiet night, the residents of the nearby town claim they can still hear the sound of screams coming from the building. I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm afraid of what might happen if I share this story online, but I need to tell someone. Anyone. It started with a friend's suggestion. "Hey, have you ever heard of this old abandoned church on the outskirts of town? I heard it's cursed by a satanic cult," he said. I was intrigued, but also a bit skeptical. I had explored a lot of abandoned places before, and I never encountered anything paranormal. But there was something about this church that drew me in, so one day I decided to go check it out. As soon as I arrived, I could feel a heavy presence in the air. The church was old and decrepit. Its walls were covered in ominous symbols and graffiti. The entrance was boarded up, but I managed to find a way in through a broken window. The inside of the church was even more unsettling. It was pitch black, and the only light came from the moon through the stained glass windows. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. And then I saw it. In the center of the room, there was an altar. It was made of stone and covered in strange markings. I couldn't see what was on it, but I could feel the energy emanating from it. It was like something was calling out to me. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. I froze, thinking that maybe I had been caught by the police or someone else. But the footsteps sounded different. They were slow and deliberate, and seemed to be coming from all around me. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I knew I wasn't alone. That's when I felt something brush against my leg. It was cold and slimy, like a tentacle. I screamed and tried to run, but I felt something grab onto me. It was like invisible hands were pulling me back. I tried to fight it, but it was too strong. Then I heard a voice. It was deep and guttural, like it was coming from the bowels of the earth.
"Welcome, child. We've been waiting for you,"
it said. I don't remember much after that. I woke up outside the church, my body covered in scratches and bruises. I don't know how I got there, or how I managed to escape, but I knew that I had to get out of there as fast as possible. For weeks after that, I was plagued by nightmares. I saw visions of strange symbols and shadowy figures. I heard voices whispering in my ear, telling me to come back to the church. I tried to ignore them, but they grew louder. That's when I realized that I had made a mistake. I had uncovered something that I shouldn't have, something that was beyond my understanding, and now I was afraid of what might happen if I spoke of it. But the nightmares continued. They grew more vivid and intense with each passing night, and then, one night, I woke up to find that I wasn't alone. It was tall and thin, with long arms and a face that was twisted in a grotesque smile. Its eyes were black and soulless, and it was staring right at me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. It was like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. And then the figure spoke.
"You should have never come to the church. Now, you belong to us."
I don't remember anything after that. The next thing I knew, I woke up in the hospital. I frantically searched the room for any exit, but there was none. The door was now gone, and the only way out was through the window. I looked out and saw that it was several floors up. I knew that jumping would mean certain death, but I didn't have a choice. I had to take my chances. I took a deep breath and jumped out of the window. As I was falling, I closed my eyes and hoped for the best. When I opened them again, I was lying on my bedroom floor. I quickly got up and ran to the door, but it was locked. I was trapped. That's when I heard the whispers again. They were getting louder and more intense, and I could hear them more clearly than ever. They told me to give in, accept my fate, and join them in the darkness. I fell to my knees and screamed in terror. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't escape from. The whispers continued, and I could feel their icy breath on the back of my neck. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. The room was silent. I looked around and saw that everything was back to normal. The door was open, and the sun was shining through the window. It was as if the whole thing had never happened. I was so relieved that I fell to the ground and started crying. I didn't know what to make of it all. Was it just a nightmare? Or was it something more? Something that was trying to pull me into the darkness? I still don't know the answer to that question. All I know is that I'm never going to mess around with the paranormal again. I've learned my lesson the hard way. And if you're reading this, I urge you to take my experience as a warning. The darkness is real, and it's waiting for its next victim.